Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPL, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe Vallejo,
And I'm Mike Rice.
and today we're finally going to talk about the Canadian Championship, something that people were wondering when we're going to get some news about it. It's been a little bit of time, especially with domestic cup issues happening further south of the border. We're getting even more antsy about the Canadian Championship, but it is finally here. We're going to go and talk about the new rules, the new format, and the draw that happened today at the time of recording. We're also going to go over the CONCACAF Champions Cup with Cavalry and a few transfer tap-ins. But before we dive into all of that, remember to follow us on all of our socials at Coast to Coast FC and on Spotify, Apple, and as always, YouTube, so you can see our beautiful faces and the visuals that we are creating on the podcast now. But speaking of, I feel like I speak for everybody when we all are feeling like this meme right here of praising that the Canadian Championship is back. We got news yesterday about the new rules and format, and they were very quick to sort of get everything going because the very next day, aka today, we got the draw, Mike. Obviously there's some drama going on in the United States with the Open Cup, and I feel like that made a lot of Canadians also a little worried about what's happening with their domestic cup. Were you a little surprised that we had to wait sort of so late compared to other years to get the format and the draw and everything, just any announcement whatsoever, and for the Canadian Championship?
A little bit, but then, I mean, it's not like there's not a lot going on in Canada soccer currently. So maybe they've got their hands tied with a few things. So we'll let that slide slightly.
Yeah, that's very true. It's never a boring day in Canadian soccer, I'll tell you that much. But we do have the Canadian Championship back, and it's in a new look Canadian Championship. There's a new format, there's some new rules that are making it a little bit more interesting. Mike and I have some differing opinions on it that we'll talk about in a little bit. But let's go over the teams that are participating. As you can see on the screen, are Atletico Ottawa, Cavalry, CF Montreal, Forge, Halifax Wanderers, Pacific, Simcoe County Rovers, Toronto FC, Valor, Vancouver FC, Vancouver Whitecaps, Victoria Highlanders, York United, and the that Quebec team that I don't know how to pronounce particularly well. I'm gonna see what the actual
Saint
name is.
Laurent. We'll go with Saint
Saint
Laurent.
Laurent. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I thought it was a different team that name.
I mean, I don't
Saint
speak
Laurent.
much French at all, so you'll have to. Yeah, I may have butchered that a little bit, but Saint Laurent.
No, you're right. Saint Laurent. I was actually confusing that logo for somebody else. That's my bad. But those are the participating teams. We have actually got a new format where we have a preliminary round for single knockout. We have two match series for the quarterfinal and a two match series for the semifinal before as usual, one-legged knockout for the final match. So some changes from the previous iteration is also that these games are now spaced out. While before we had pretty much the entirety of the Canadian Championship done by June, I believe it was, or early
Yeah.
July. Now we have it going all the way until late September, which means we get some more summer soccer for Canadian domestic football, which is great to see. But let's go over some of the quick dates, quick sort of format of what it is. The first preliminary round, there are 6 matches played between 12 teams. They are split sort of regionally. 6-6 between the East and the West. One Eastern team is going to jump over into the Western bracket just to make things fair, and then those matches are going to be played between 23rd of April and the 1st of May. Then we're going to go into the quarterfinal. That's where the two finalists were from last year. Vancouver Whitecaps are reigning champions, and CF Montreal. They're also sort of split regionally. So the Whitecaps are in the Western division, and Montreal is in the Eastern division. And then there are there is a redraw between the quarterfinal and the semifinal, meaning that we stop with the sort of regionalized trend, and then anybody could face anybody. And depending on the team's ranking, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the results, we will have one club host the final to host whichever the winner of the other semifinal is. And like I said before, these are games that are going to happen between April and May, July, August, going all the way until late September. So as you can see, we have the draw for those who are looking at the visual. For those who are not, we're going to go through all 6 of the games. Some important things to keep note if you have any questions as to why certain teams are away and how they chose who is hosting. Once again, it is the teams that are semi-pro are away because they're lower on the ranking. So like Saint Laurent and Simcoe County Rovers are going to play away, as well as Victoria Highlanders, and then Valor is going to be playing away, more than likely because of the stadium issues that they're
Yeah.
having, the renovations that they're going through. So they have to play away.
Mm.
Um, and then everything else, I believe, is on the rankings that they have that we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
But the first match is Cavalry FC hosting Vancouver FC. Second match is Atletico Ottawa hosting Valor FC. Third is Pacific FC hosting Victoria Highlanders FC. So that's quote unquote the Western Division. Again, I know it's a little weird with Ottawa hosting in technically
Yeah.
the Western Division, but things are, a little bit uneven, so they had to kind of
Valor sort of
round
slap
things
down
out.
the middle, aren't they? Really, it's they
Yeah,
can
exactly.
go either
I mean,
side.
Valor is going to be very used to playing away from home, so
Yeah.
that'll be not that much of an issue for them at that point. And then in the Eastern Division, we have Forge FC facing York United, Halifax Wanderers facing Saint Laurent, and Toronto FC facing Simcoe County Rovers. So if you see a lot of derbies, a lot of local derbies, that was sort of on purpose, given
Mm.
the regionalization that was done in the first 2 rounds. And again, a lot of it has to do with the ranking of Canadian teams. So how were these teams ranked by Canada Soccer? They were ranked based on the last 3 years of the Canadian Championship. That's key. Not their domestic leagues, but in the Canadian Championship, with the most weight being paid on 2023, so last year's edition. So, as it stands, these are the 11 teams that are ranked. Number 1 is obviously the holders, Vancouver Whitecaps. They won it last year and they won it the year before. Then it's CF Montreal, they were finalists. Then it's Toronto FC. Obviously, MLS teams are on top. Then it's Pacific in fourth, Forge in fifth, York United in sixth, Cavalry in seventh, Halifax in eighth, Atletico Ottawa in ninth, Valor in 10th, and obviously Vancouver FC. They had their first iteration last year and lost their opening match against York United. They are at the bottom in the 11th, and then you'd imagine is all of these semi-pro teams.
Yeah.
So, with this all in mind, a lot of information about the new format, we have now some tasty matchups that we can talk about, Mike. I mean, there are a lot of first round single knockout games that we can chat about, that maybe lead into some more interesting quarterfinal 2 match legs
Mm.
that we can, or series that we can chat about. But before we get into that, I am curious, what was your reaction to this new format, and what are some of the things that you might not be the biggest fan of? Because I know for me, the single
Mm.
leg preliminary round is something that I guess everyone is already used to, but the 2 match series for the quarterfinal and semifinal, I think makes things more interesting. I'm not 100% sure if away goals rule is going to be involved in this. I'm under the assumption that it is. But if I am wrong, then somebody can correct me after listening to this. But if away goals rule is in effect, I believe that it opens up the ability to have a couple more upsets, just because if the away goals rule happens for the smaller team, if they can nick a result away from home, they can go back home and have that home crowd support to try to see the game out, rather than, because of the rankings, a lot of the lower rated teams are all going to have the sort of gargantuan task of going to a tougher team at their home. So it kind of opens it up a little bit. Plus, it gives us an extra 90 plus, maybe 120 minutes of football to watch in the quarterfinal and the semifinal stage. So that's why I really like it. But I'm curious to see what your qualms are with the 2-match series.
Yeah, I just for me, like as everyone knows, I'm over here in England, and the we're very much used to like the FA Cup's huge, League Cup's huge. Like we've got a lot of history in this, and cup upsets don't happen too often, but they do happen in for me. And when I look back at them, they happen on single legs. It's a one-off. Um, if we come into a situation, we look at this preliminary round, trying to take Simcoe Rovers versus Toronto. If Simcoe Rovers put in an incredible performance and upset the odds like Maidstone just did with Ipswich over here, they are bombarded. And Toronto just can't find the net. And Simcoe Rovers break away at one point during the game and manage to nick a goal. They come away with a 1-0 win. Single knockout, they're through. Fantastic. Two-legged, is Toronto going to miss 25 chances the next game that they have? And it just gives that bigger team the opportunity to go, right, okay, we can attack you, we can keep going. Yeah, we messed up on that first game. You look back at last year when Valor went across to TSS Rovers and got that, and TSS Rovers got that dramatic win. They got that big 3-1 win. It was fantastic at home, like incredible. Like Valor couldn't keep up with the atmosphere. Possibly not the best example because of how Valor won for all of last season. But if you indulge me slightly, if Valor got to take them back to Winnipeg, who's saying Valor don't just go and get 2 goals and win that game? Like it's a lot for these the smaller teams who it's harder to travel. It's newer to travel. I mean, like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver are traveling every week. Like they are going across the United States regularly. They're used to this. They've got the money to do it in comfort. But these League One teams and our Canadian Championship, Canadian Premier League teams, I mean, they struggled. I mean, look at Halifax and Pacific, the amount of travel they were having to do going into the playoffs, and it was really showing. Like this favors, in my mind, personally, it favors Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto because they've got bigger squads to call on. They've got international players to call on at decent, at high level national team quality teams. Like, yeah, we have some players who will go abroad, who will go and play for their national teams in the CPL. But I mean, Toronto have got Italian internationals. I mean, yeah, it's questionable. And MLS, we'll leave that to the side. That's for another. That's for someone else on the MLS podcast to discuss how terrible that's gone. But when you think about it against lower league, like smaller budget teams, it just gives them an extra 90 minutes to make up for any lapse in play. If they do get caught out that one time, they can make up for it. And that's how for me, that's how I often find it.
Fair. No, I hear you there. I think it honestly, if they were going to choose a 2 sort of match series, I think considering that they're all basing it off a ranking index now, and considering that all of the League One teams are away from home, which makes it immediately more difficult for them. I guess if they were, it would have been more fair to also have them have a home leg in the preliminary round so that they might have a chance to host some of these bigger teams. I mean, for Simcoe County Rovers to be able to host Toronto FC might be great for their business. I know for TSS Rovers, when they were hosting Valor, that was the biggest game of their, of their League One history,
Yeah.
and it was a huge crowd, and it was a great night to be able to bring that sort of environment to a stadium or to a crowd that maybe isn't used to having such a big game. I know that was a huge attraction for it, and a lot of people were upset initially when they found out that all of the League One teams, the semi-pro teams, were going to all be visitors and they weren't going to have those home games. That's why I think maybe if they can provide an upset in the preliminary round, then in the second game, they might not be able to necessarily advance because they have to do it twice. But
Mm.
at the very least, they can have a home match so that they can, show their fans a great night, a match against, Toronto FC. If you're Simcoe, if you're Saint Laurent, then it's at Halifax,
Yeah.
hosting Halifax.
And that's
For the
interesting. I'm curious. Sorry, just to jump in. I'm curious for your thoughts. Like, yeah, fantastic. They like you want your home fans to experience getting these players down, but for some of these League One Ontario players, they get to go and play in BMO Field, like in front of a big crowd. Like, so it's. Do you find like for you? Is it like sometimes I find it hard to pick. If I was going to choose these rules, it's hard for me to say like maybe you give it to the lower seed team to say like, do you want to be home or away? Like, give them the opportunity to pick it because
hmm.
they've got like because on both sides of the like on both sides of the card there you've got positives and negatives for both. I don't know what you feel about that.
No, you're right, because one thing that I guess a lot of people don't consider is the cost for a team, because the cost of hosting a match to make sure that you have food, you have security, you have all of these amenities for a much larger crowd than you're used to. And like, I know that again with TSS Rovers, I had some insights in Canada Soccer has a high standards for what they want their match day experience to be like, and some requirements that they need, that for these semi-pro sides, they kind of have to fork over the cash and hope that they attract enough people to sort of break even, because they're spending a lot more because they're getting a lot more people, they're getting a lot
Yeah,
more attention. Some of these teams aren't used to having, these production companies come in with a lot of these cameras. They have to make sure that they have it, set up, or if they already have sort of equipment there that's up to par. And there's a lot of these other factors that
yeah,
maybe some semi-pro teams would rather be like, "Nah, we'll just
yeah,
go to you guys. You guys
yeah,
have already everything set." So maybe allowing the lower seeded team, especially for the semi-pro teams, to get have that option might be a bit more fair, because
mm,
I guess I'm basing a lot of the Rovers thing is like, I wish I could see another game where a League One team, a semi-pro team, hosts a pro team like Canadian Premier League or an MLS side, because it's in those environments where like the magic of the cup
mm,
happens. Really, a lot of the upsets that we've seen over the years, with Pacific and Cavalry, with the Whitecaps, Valor, and TSS Rovers, it usually happens because it's not played at the bigger team stadium. It happens because
yeah,
it's played at the smaller team stadium. So I wish it was still sort of focusing on that. I understand where the ranking index sort of comes in. I do like that for the ranking index, it doesn't come into play in the semifinals,
mm,
and that allows any team to host the final. So they just sort of decide which of the series like is going to have the hosting duties. The winner of which series is going to have the whichever wins basically hosts the final, but it's not going to be determinate of the index that I
yeah,
just gave out earlier. So that means any club that reaches a semifinal could host. So a CPL club, if they manage to go all the way to a semifinal and go into the final, they could potentially host the Canadian Championship final, which would be huge for
mm,
whichever team that may be. But still, again, the only qualm I have with this, which is why I don't mind the two match series in the quarterfinal, is that I would love to be able to see these smaller teams be able to host some of these bigger teams, even if it is, like Halifax Wanderers hosting a Toronto FC at the Kitchen. I think that would be a great
yeah,
opportunity for them to be able to have that. And if it was only a single leg and it was dominated by the ranking index, then pretty much every game would probably be at BMO, BC Place, or Stade Saputo.
yeah,
So it does give a little bit of variance
mm,
to to the way things are done. And then if away goals, I always find if away goals are in, which I'm hoping they are, it always makes things more exciting,
yeah.
knowing that if you get a result away from home, then you have a big advantage going into the home leg.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult. It depends what hat you're putting on. If you're putting on the player's hat or the fan's hat, like the venue changes. I think, somewhat. And like a lot of these players at Simcoe, Saint Laurent, Victoria Highlanders, they're not going to make, like, a lot of them aren't going to make CPL. They're not going to make MLS. So if they get the chance to play at these stadiums, fantastic. If you think of it just purely on their personal experience as players, but for the fans, you want to, yeah, you want to. Canada's huge. It's not like you like, even though this is split between regions, there's still a bit. It's not like you're just taking a like an hour trip down the road because it's an away game. This is still quite a commitment for a lot of these fans.
Very true. Exactly. That's a good point, and that's why I feel like, for what it is, I think it's pretty good. I think it's at least
Yeah,
an exciting new format, and it has led to some pretty interesting matchups.
yeah,
So I don't know if we'll go necessarily through all of them and talk at length about all of them. There are a few that I do want to sort of point out. The first one being Cavalry against Vancouver FC, because not only for the match itself, Cavalry FC, strongest team in the league last year, North Shield champs. Uh, they're facing Vancouver FC, who are undergone a huge rebuild right now, and they've brought in a lot of attractive names. One that we'll talk about in particular at the end of the show, a new transfer. They are going to have a huge test against Cavalry at Atco Field. But the biggest draw about this matchup is that whoever wins is going to face Vancouver Whitecaps, the reigning champs. And that could either mean, if Cavalry go through, a rematch for the Whitecaps against Cavalry after their little upset a few years ago, or the first ever Vancouver versus Vancouver tie-up in
yeah.
the quarterfinal if Vancouver FC managed to do it. They teased us a little bit last year with doing that, but unfortunately, Vancouver FC could not beat York United.
Mm.
If this time around Vancouver FC do manage to beat Cavalry FC, then we might be able to see the Whitecaps host the Eagles at BC Place, and we might be able to see Vancouver Whitecaps show up at Willoughby Park. So that'll be definitely an interesting local game
Yeah,
there. For
definitely.
that one, do you have any, initial reaction to which one might be going through to face the Whitecaps?
Um, I'd love it for if Vancouver could get in that, because I think we haven't we didn't mention, obviously, in the last one, when we were in the last pod, but two now, I think, Vancouver with their game with Tigres when they went over to the island to play at Starlight Stadium and try to rebrand themselves as unofficially as Vancouver Island Whitecaps. I think CPL sides in the region, Pacific and probably Vancouver, are a little bit frustrated maybe by the perceived smugness of the MLS big side with all the money. And I think a very new local derby would provide a lot of intensity in a really improving Vancouver side in such a short period of time.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that would make a really exciting. I mean, I'm not saying Vancouver FC would go out and beat the Whitecaps. They're still a lot. They're in their second year of existence this year, and I had to keep myself realistic about it. But I think that's something that's. I think for me personally, just watching that, I think that's going to stir something up amongst these CPL sides. So I am really looking forward to the Vancouver Whitecaps games as they come up, especially if they do get a team from BC.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be, I mean, especially, yeah, like you mentioned, and a new and intense local derby. There's a little bit of flames, with the Sean Hundle comments last year,
Yeah,
between the Whitecaps and Julian Gressel's response to Vancouver FC. But I feel like that kind of fired up a little bit, but kind of dwindled away, especially
yeah, they
since
both
Vancouver
left the
FC.
region, didn't they? So they killed it.
Exactly. And so now it's an opportunity to kind of stoke those fires again if they do go through. But I
Yeah,
mean, if Cavalry win, Cavalry have such a strong side now, and we'll talk about their performance against Orlando City in a bit. But they have shown in the past, and with the quality that they have now, that they might be able to, give another run for the money of Whitecaps, and maybe provide another cup set.
Yeah,
Uh, Either way, I think that tie against the Whitecaps will provide a lot of action, and with the Whitecaps, gunning to make it a three-peat, they're definitely not gonna take it easy, and it'll be a good match overall.
yeah,
I kind of wish, as much as I do love that Vancouver FC, I kind of wish it was Pacific instead of Vancouver FC, just because, like you mentioned, the Vancouver Island drama,
yeah.
that's more fresh in the memory. That would have been
Mm.
a very fiery, having the Whitecaps back at Starlight, but this time once again as visitors. And I'm sure the Lakeside boys would have had a tifo ready for the Whitecaps, making fun of the whole Vancouver Island Whitecaps
Yeah,
thing. But last not to be, maybe in the semifinals, if they both go that far, and if
yeah,
we have some luck in the draw, that would make it even more intense.
yeah.
Um, but that will be something down the line.
I think
Pas-
they're opposite sides of the draw, though, and apologies to Valor and Pacific fans, especially, and the Highlanders fans. But that's Atletico Ottawa have got to be now looking at, right, okay, semi-final probably against Vancouver Whitecaps. That's what we're aiming for. That's got to be their minimum expectations from the signings they've made at the beginning of the season. What do you think?
Yeah, no. I think that outside of the three MLS teams, if you're looking at who probably has, at least on paper, the most chance of going the furthest because of their stunning signings that they've made all of this offseason,
We'll
Atletico
see how they fit
Ottawa.
together, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. They might be an issue. They might find a similar issue to what Pacific had last year, of having a bunch of stars and not really figuring it out how to keep them consistently playing well. But on paper, which is the only
Yeah,
way we can talk about it for now,
yeah, for
it
now.
does seem like Ottawa is the strongest of sides. I mean, against the Valor FC side, it's funny talking about perspective. Both Ottawa and Valor have added a lot of new names, but a
Mm.
lot of people are more looking like, oh, Ottawa have this like super side. Well, for Valor, they've been like, oh, they've signed a bunch of players and they're gonna have
Yeah,
no
just
synergy.
they are a bunch of players. Yeah, it's
And
not.
so it's funny, the differing perspectives on it, because they're both gonna be trying to find out how to play with a bunch of new names. But I do feel like Ottawa have the leg up on Valor there, and the next game of Pacific FC against Victoria Highlanders, a local derby on the island. I
Mm,
believe it's the first time that those two teams are facing against each other. Will be a good one for all of the football fans on the island to be able to see that match. But yeah, Ottawa will probably fancy their chances against whichever winner comes out of that tie, and against Valor to be able to go probably to the semifinals.
mm.
But looking at the Eastern Conference, I mean, the big one there for me is the 905 Derby, Forge FC against York United. It might be a potential rematch if Forge FC go through to face CF Montreal again, like they did last year, and fell to Montreal there. They might be able to have a chance of revenge, but you never know. York United and Forge FC, those matches historically have been a lot closer than what most people think, especially with um, you know form and where they are in the table. That sort of goes out the window on 905 derbies. You can think of York United stunning Forge last year at the beginning of the season, when Forge were starting really strong thanks to that Brem Sumaro long shot goal. You never
Yeah.
know what happens in a
We still
905
don't know
derby. That's
so
why.
much about York, do we? We're not, and well, we don't know enough about York from the signings they've made to make any judgment until they start playing. So York could be a bit of a basket case again. They could be fantastic for all we know at the moment. So I think Forge are probably looking at this going, "Oh God, like who are we going to be playing? This isn't York from last year."
Very true. Even though it is still Martin Nash's team, there's a bunch of new names involved, a
Mm,
bunch of players that have left, a new club identity. So we'll see how they play, how much Nashi changes things due to this new era that they're living in, or if he will want to keep his team similar to how they played last year. We'll have to wait until the season starts to really
yeah.
be able to glean anything from it. But either one of those teams going up against Montreal will be a great sight to see. And then for the two other ones, Toronto FC facing Simcoe County Rovers. For Simcoe, obviously that'll be a huge match. Like you mentioned, they'll be able to go and play at BMO Field. That'll be something that for the players will be a fantastic experience, and it'll give them a chance to play. Like I said in my tweet, David versus Goliath. Obviously, Toronto FC are the heavy favorites, but Toronto FC are also Toronto FC.
Yeah, they've probably
And
been looking down. They've probably been looking at the US and all the issues with the Open Cup, and they've probably been thinking like, do we want to be embarrassed again? Should we just duck out now?
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, if I was Simcoe County Rovers and I had to look at all three MLS teams, which one would I rather face? I think Toronto FC would probably be the team I'd want to face the most.
Just distracting
Given
by
what
the rescue with a new vape. I was like,
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so Simcoe County Rovers will have the opportunity. Saint Laurent will be going to the kitchen for the away match, facing Halifax Wanderers, and then the winners of those two ties will face into the quarter finals. So a lot of good matches that we'll be seeing in late April, early May, I believe, and then Canadian Championship going all the way until September will be a rare sight.
nice
Having
sunny
it
final.
September. Yeah, exactly. Having it September 24th. Well, I guess depends where it is,
Yes.
because in some places in Canada, even in late September, it's already getting cold. So hopefully it's not going to be like that, but you never know. Canada's wide and vast with many different climates and such.
Maybe they're waiting
So
so long because it's going to be in Winnipeg.
yeah, that's yeah,
Ready for the final.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, let us know on social media or in response to this podcast what your predictions are for the Canadian Championship. Who do you think will win? Who do you think will have some upsets? We would love to hear what you have in store for us. But that is all going over our Canadian Championship format and reaction. Now we're going to move on to talking about some CONCACAF Champions Cup, where Cavalry FC, not at home, but technically at home, they were at Starlight Stadium. I wasn't able to go across the island this time. I had other commitments, but they played the home team against MLS side Orlando City SC. And unfortunately for them, it was not to be. They lost 3-0 on the night on their home leg, making it an absolute mountain to climb in the away leg later next week to be able to have any chance of advancing. Now, this was a match that by the result, it looked very one-sided. But Mike, you said that you were actually rather impressed by the
Mm.
way that Cavalry played, and you actually thought that Orlando City, despite the scoreline, weren't all that impressive.
No, I think Oscar Bereja will probably. I mean, he was banned from the game, wasn't he? So he was watching from the stands himself. I don't think he'd be particularly happy at all, considering the golf that in finances and everything like that. But if you look at what Orlando City did against both sides, obviously in preseason form, but I think he's going to look at that and think when we go up against MLS sides, I think they're going to be really concerned. I thought Cavalry did really well in long periods of this game, except in the final third. That's when the quality, that little golf in quality, which you can buy, which you can get from this. Being in a league that has that bigger prestige, little bit more history, they've got those options when you can bring in someone like Facundo Torres. He's not coming to the CPL for a reason. Like he's got the quality that will demand a lot more money. And that's the issue Cavalry found. But I really did. I thought they've started really well. They really did put Orlando under a lot of pressure. That first 10 minutes, I was really impressed with how they looked fearless in that first 10 minutes. I think the issue was that they didn't get that. I think they went out and just thought, let's put them under pressure. We've got some players that can sort of bully them. I mean, Charlie Trafford, I thought was fantastic throughout this game. You got Jesse Daly, who puts in a lot of work. Camargo was really industrious, and like Ali Musi was starting to get some opportunities on the ball. But when they didn't get really a shot at goal in that 10 minutes because they couldn't get that, then sort of nerves started creeping in the defense. And throughout the game, that's going to happen. Like you're playing against teams with very sort of experienced players, and it was just it was just difficult. And I don't think like I mean. I'm curious to how you feel as well, because I mean, I text you saying I don't think Orlando will be happy with. I mean, obviously they'll be happy with 3-0 win, but I don't think they'll be particularly happy with their performance when thinking about MLS.
Yeah. I mean, I to a degree, I agree with you. I don't think this was Orlando at their very best.
Mm.
To be fair, they're also in a preseason right
Yeah,
now. This is not them, like in mid-season form of as we've seen with other teams like from Mexico and Central America. But I do think, they showed enough quality to get the job done. I'm
yeah,
thinking that y- versus against Cavalry, despite the golf in class, I think Cavalry and most CPL sides usually showcase something that is akin to punching above their weight. And so I don't think they were going to take the game too lightly. Plus, there was the whole thing of Luis Muriel. He just came in the
mm,
MLS season. He might be, he's picked to be a favorite for top goal scorer because of his exploits in Europe.
mm,
But I still think that there was a few players that really impressed me. Obviously, Duncan Maguire. There was the whole drama for him about Blackburn Rovers and the administrative mistake that stopped them from going abroad. He picked up where he left off last season, scoring a really well worked team goal. One that was similar to what Warchewski had as an opportunity. I believe it
mm.
was in the first half, but he missed. Um, but the player I was most impressed by with Orlando is Ivan Angulo, a Colombian wingback, because he was just tearing down that right side and just was
Right.
causing all sort of mayhem for Cavalry. And even though Cavalry, I think, played pretty well, they were decent possession. They had some pretty good set pieces, just defending and offensive set pieces. I think it was just a case of Orlando just being more clinical, having players that can
Yeah.
be those difference makers. And it's unfortunate on the second goal. It's a great shot by I believe it was Facundo Torres who shot it,
Oh, it's got the last,
and
yeah, too. Yeah, so
yeah, and it was Carducci or should have done better to keep that away. Kind of,
yeah,
I think he was late to looking at it. It seemed like there was
that's the thing.
a few
That's
bodies, but yeah.
yeah, like that's what I could you're 100% right there. I think from like the perfect angle from behind Carducci would be nice, but it did look like there were players in his way, and Facundo Torres just showed his quality of like picking that perfect timing to take that shot, because no one in CPL was probably seeing that opportunity. I think that's just a high quality part where he sees a tiny gap to go through, because Carducci's kind of on his heels, ready to make another move, expecting a shot, not in the next step or maybe a step after, not at that moment. And I think Carducci's had a little bit of a hard time from the Cavalry fans, like from his performance in this game, and I just think I think it was just quality from Facu Torres rather than a major mistake from those. But I think the other ones were mistakes from players, and that's to be expected from a team that's playing against an MLS side who are having to be like, you've got to be 100% at your best throughout this game. Like for a CPL side, like I don't want to pick on Kobza because I thought he had a really good game throughout almost all of this match. He almost got one back for his side, but I think he made a couple of poor decisions, and he was the one that was targeted. Duncan Maguire got in front of him for his goal, but I think maybe he wasn't aware of, like, Duncan Maguire's movement was quite good, so I don't think Kobza was aware that he was actually the man to track him. Dan Klump had to look at other players, maybe, but then Carducci maybe could have said something. I'm not sure. But the final goal, Kobza dives in on the halfway line and misses a chance, and then all of a sudden Orlando are on a 4v2 breakaway, and it's just like, you don't need to make that diving tackle, like, just retreat. And so it's just little, I just felt like the goals that came for Orlando were little mistakes or big bits of quality, which makes me really confident for Cavalry. I think,
Hmm.
like, I don't think they're going to take that big of a mental hit from this defeat, because there's going to be a lot of positives to look back on.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the biggest things that you have to keep in mind is that a lot of these teams have experience in continental
Yeah,
competitions, and this is the first time that Cavalry is playing a team of this size in their short history. You know, that was the whole thing, that why Tommy Wilden Jr. wanted to finally win something with Cavalry.
yeah,
So to be able to have the opportunity to go
yeah,
to Europe, it's a little bit different to what happened with Forge, because Forge has had plenty of continental competition history before, with the CONCACAF Champions League, with the CONCACAF League, which was sort of akin to, in Europe, the Europa League compared to the Champions League. Before that was sort of defunct. And for Cavalry, they needed experience, and they had zero experience. This was the experience that they needed. It was a humbling of sorts, but I think it was necessary, and it's one that they'll be able to take a lesson from. And I think, they'll be better for it. Obviously, except for Forge, they've had a competitive match before everybody else has, so
mm.
it allows them to be sharper for the start of the season. Um, but yeah, I think with Cavalry, it was just preseason rust was showing quite a bit. A few players just positionally were a bit off. They
It's
looked a
just
little
having to
lost
be,
and
yeah,
disorganized.
they just have to be on for 90 minutes. Whereas in CPL last year, they were so dominant, but they were able to take a step back, keep the ball, things like that. They couldn't do that in this game. Like they knew they couldn't do that in this game, and like we all did. And they had to be on for 90 minutes mentally and physically, and that's really hard for your first game of the season.
Exactly. I mean, even for the Whitecaps, to ask
Mm,
that of them against Tigres when we were talking about them
exactly,
in
another
the
three.
last couple episodes, it was the same thing. Now this is,
Mm,
you could argue, an even bigger gap between Orlando City, which is a very good side, and
yeah.
MLS against Cavalry, a CPL side that's only 5 going to be 6 years old. So it was a admirable performance by Cavalry, and I think for them, it'll be something that, regardless of the result, was always going to be an accomplishment.
Mm.
Now, going into next week, going to Orlando, to Florida, if you were a Cavalry fan or a player or a coach, what would you realistically want from this game? Because it's a tall task to be able to turn this around
Yeah.
away from home. But what are you wanting to get out of this game for you?
It's the same thing as Forge going to Mexico, isn't it? I just think they want you to go out and just think, okay, we tried to be in the game in the first leg. We did what we could. It hasn't worked out. We've got a huge deficit now. Like, let's just try and be dangerous. Let's try and be a little bit more dynamic in that final third. Both teams were really interesting. The fact that they did rotate a lot of players and positions. It was they were all of, like, both Cavalry and Orlando. Like, no one was just like, you've got Duncan Maguire who's a 9, but the rest of that team moved around so much. But then Tommy Wooden Jr. is doing the other side with his defenders. He's doing it with his forwards. Players are moving around, and it was really interesting to watch and really exciting, like, to see, like, Tommy Wooden Jr. and these players, like you say, in their first CONCACAF, like, continental tournament, just going, like, we've done this in the last year. We're just going to carry on. Like, it doesn't matter. We're playing an MS team. Doesn't matter. This is what we are, and this is what we want to do. We want to be innovative. We want to try new things. We want to rotate players, and we want to do something. And I was so excited to see that. I just want to see them a little bit more sharper and a little bit more braver. I think I wrote down in the first half, Willie Akio just ran at his man in the 45th minute. for the first time, and he just dominated. He went past him really well. I forget who was playing right back, the Icelandic guy. But he just ran at him, and he put him under so much pressure, and he looked scared. Just like, do that again, please. Like, you've got pace, give it a go. And they didn't do. Sometimes they were just seemed a little bit conservative going into that final third. I just want them to not be so conservative in that game and just go, yeah, try it, use your strengths and see what happens, because it's a 3-0 deficit. So what does it matter? If you lose, you lose. If you get a goal, fantastic.
Yeah, I think honestly, the 3-0 scoreline is something that it almost might be a blessing in disguise, because it allows them to play without pressure, because
Yeah.
everyone is counting them out. It's very much like no one, I don't even think maybe many Cavalry fans believe that they can turn
No,
this
yeah.
around. So now go out and just play your game.
Get something to
Yeah,
chill and take home with you. Like,
yeah, go and get something to write home about, basically. Leave with something, whether that be a goal or just a really admirable performance. At this point, it's going to be about moments, whether it's a goal or a tackle or a dribble or a skill move or something, just something to give fans a cheer about and for you to have a memorable moment. And as a club, having the opportunity to have another experience to grow and evolve from. I, I think, yeah, I'm with you there, where I'm hoping Cavalry just kind of stop, fretting about the little details and just go into it guns blazing, gung ho. Just we're gonna attack, we're gonna do our best, and if it's a defeat, if it's a 3-0 defeat, it doesn't matter, because we're gonna try to play our way. We're gonna try to play aggressive on the front foot, even if the odds and everyone there is standing against us. We're
yeah,
gonna do it our way. I think that would be the thing that I would want the most out of Cavalry against Orlando. But you
yeah,
never know with Tommy Wilden Jr. He is a man that very much puts the team first, and he likes to have things not necessarily rigid, but he knows what he wants from his team, and he
yeah.
wants it in a
So
certain way.
we're asking a lot from that team, because we want them to do it, but when you think back at last year, I mean, they weren't they overscored what they were expected to get. They were defensively resolute. They were winning games by narrow margins, but relatively comfortably and in control of games. They weren't a team that were blowing out and just going, right, let you go 4-0, let's go home, let's win the next one.
Yeah, true, true. So we might be asking the right thing from the wrong team here. Um,
I just
but
think I watched Ali Musi and Willie Akio, especially in this game. And Ali Musi was exciting at moments. Willie Akio exciting at moments. I just want them to just like have a little bit more freedom. Go into the next game with a little less nerves and just go, I'm just going at this fullback and we'll see what we can do.
yeah, yeah, I think having that ability that they have, they should use it. They should flaunt it. They should take advantage of it and just take your man on a couple of times, like you mentioned. Make him a little bit scared. Make him second guess himself.
Yeah.
That it's those little, duels that you can win that can turn the tide of a match, and you can create something out of nothing. That's why you have the players like Ali Musi and William Aki on your team to be able to
Because
do that.
Musi was
So
worrying him. I think Smith, I think it's been brought up a lot. Like Smith, I don't know how he wasn't booked for his foul on Musi. Like, he barged,
mm,
the ball had gone past, Musi has gone past, and he barged him and knocked him to the ground. Didn't pick up a booking at all. But if he had, which he maybe should, I think he should have, that just adds more confidence to Musi to just go, because he's rattled and he's on a yellow. Like, you need to get to that position.
yeah, exactly. Gives them a little bit of advantage going into it. It's the little things that, yeah, hopefully we get to see a little bit more from Cavalry in the second leg. And all the luck for Cavalry. It'll be a very interesting podcast if they do manage to pull off a comeback. I think that'll dominate maybe the entirety of the podcast next week.
Yeah,
Um, but at the very least, hopefully, we get to see something worth chatting about in their performance
yeah.
after the game. But that's it for CONCACAF Champions Cup review. We'll be back with that next week with the second leg of the Cavalry against Orlando series. We're not going to finish up with some transfer news tap-ins. We're going to start off over on the way East Coast with Halifax, who have made two exciting signings, one surprise one and one that has been long and coming. The surprise one is a name that many fans on the East Coast will be familiar with. It's Julian Dunn. And Julian Dunn, he's a player that if you're a Toronto FC fan or you're from the Toronto area, is a name you will have heard of because he played for the Toronto FC Academy. He played for Toronto FC 2, Toronto FC 3 as well. And he played for the first team between 2016 and 2021. CPL fans from the Island Games during the height of the COVID pandemic will recognize him because he was actually a Valor player for that 1 year. He was one of the standout players of the competition for that Winnipeg side.
Yeah,
And he was nominated for the Under 21 Player of the Year award at the end of the year award. So for Halifax bringing a quality of player like him in, he was playing for HamCam in Norway. I'm not gonna attempt
great
what their
name,
full
great
name is.
name. Cam, love it.
Well, that's their shortened
I
name.
know, they should just keep it at that. I think it's a
Yeah,
fantastic.
because have you seen how long their full name is? You know what? I'm going to attempt it. I'm going to attempt what their full name is. Hamar Kamaratene. Hamar Kamaratene in Norway, aka HamCam.
Yeah.
Uh, Team in Norway's top division, so he was playing at
Mm,
a high level that we've seen a few other players play for from the CPL, like Alejandro Diaz.
yeah,
And Julian now comes in with more experience than he did for when he played for Valor in 2020. And a very exciting team under Patrice Geyser. This is actually like we were talking about who can replace Daniil Henry. Maybe not in terms of necessarily experience, though he does bring some experience, but I think in ability. Julian
mm,
Dunn immediately comes in as pushing Kyle Lowry as a starting center back against versus Dan Nimick. And even Dan Nimick, I mean, he was fantastic last season, but your spot is never assured. And
no,
Julian Dunn
actually,
comes in and makes a
Patrice
case for
Jones.
starting. It's gonna
Mm,
put a lot of pressure on the back two that was Lockery and Nimick to really continue to step up their game because
mm,
he comes in with already is not a target on his back, but already with some expectations of this guy's gonna be big for us from
yeah,
Halifax fans. So a really big signing there from Halifax, and then the other something that was has been reported for a few weeks now, if not a couple months,
well, I kind of
thanks
assumed
to
it's already been
yeah,
done.
me too. I thought it was already done. But thanks to our friend of the show, Josh Healy, aka Wonder's Notebook, he reported on Giorgio Provo coming to Halifax Wanderers. The Italian, 24 years of age, is a midfielder that apparently can play pretty much anywhere in the midfield. He can play as an attacking midfielder or a holding midfielder, which
Mm,
makes the Halifax Wanderers midfield already with Lorenzo Caligari, Gagnon Lapare, Aiden Daniels.
Daniel's fair. Like it's building up
Exactly.
isn't it, now, and that's the comment we had, wasn't it, the other week? Just saying like this team looks great on like first 11, but they don't have the depth, and we were worried and not worried, but we were like that when we did our sort of back to school podcast. We just said like we like at the moment. I think we both gave them sort of, was it a B minus or maybe a C for like the current roster, but it could be a B plus A because they just need a little bit of depth. like the whole
Yeah.
roster has been gutted once again, and they're bringing in these players, and it does look like they are addressing everything they needed to again, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, Provo played in the Atalanta Academy in Italy. He's from Bergamo. He played in the United States. He came from Creighton University, and one of the biggest things that I find very interesting about Giorgio Promo is what Patrice Geiser said about him, and that he's very, very good at line breaking passes. He is apparently a very big, deep passing range, which sounds a lot like Lorenzo
Yeah.
Caligari. So I'm interested to see if Probo is going to be a player that maybe complements Caligari, or is going to be somebody to give some competition to Caligari, since they have apparently similar profiles in how they play. I don't know exactly, because we mentioned a lot of names there that could make up a starting, three midfield for Halifax. I'll be curious to see what the actual makeup of the team is and how Probo can play alongside some of the players that we mentioned before, especially since he is a player that can allegedly play in the attack, in the holding, or in the central of midfield. So again, Halifax looking stronger and stronger day by day. Are they creeping up for you in terms of how high the table they might be, thanks to some of these signings that they've made?
Yeah, I mean, Provo, like you say, they're coming out of the Atlanta Academy. Like that's something that I can only imagine Patrice Geiser has watched quite a lot, because the style of play in Atlanta is intense. Like the way they use the ball, like is completely the opposite of the old stereotype of Serie A teams, defensively resolute, big strong guys. These Atlanta is fast, like it's quick, it's counter attacking, it's pressing. Like so he's gonna fit right in. I think the big questions we've got, like you mentioned, obviously Julian Dunn coming in, replacing Daniel Henry, and he's very much replacing him, sadly, as a player who's undergone a lot of treatment for the last few years. He's really suffered. He only played 4 times for HamCam, and he moved there in 2022. So
Mm.
he has not played a lot of football for a long, long time. You mentioned obviously he was like one of their top players over at Vala. He missed out, I believe, the under 21. That was Mo Farsi. So I think he's gone on to a relatively decent sort of career so far. So like he wasn't like he was playing in a team which didn't have other key players. So like he's definitely got the potential. I just really hope for his case and for Halifax that these sort of these big issues of injuries are behind them, because we saw when Daniel Henry came in, when he was being brought on late in games, they were moving to a back three. Like I'm curious, as well, is this something that Patrice Guys has got up his sleeve as well going into next year? Maybe this is he's coming up with something different, and if and hopefully he is, Julian Dunn's fit and ready to go, like, and he's ready to compete regularly. Could we see something a little bit different from Halifax? Because I think CPL teams are probably going to think, okay, right, we're a little bit. We know what Halifax do. It's going to be exhausting, but we're gonna come up with ways to deal with them over this off season. That we're going to try and work out ways to slow them down. And if Patrice Geiser comes with the back three and changes the way he constructs his entire attack, like the rest of the league, just be like, oh God, Patrice, please come on. And he's been at the Whitecaps for a lot of this off season. I remember you say you've seen him down at training sessions over there, watching them play, and the Whitecaps have come out with a back three this year. So maybe it's something that maybe it's something he could be experimenting with.
Yeah, he was where Patrice there was there shadowing Vanny Sartini, so maybe got some ideas, and playing a back three might be the way that he looks at changing things up. But yeah, I think overall, definitely, I think with the way that Halifax are moving now in this new era under Geyser, these are some very positive signings. And I think honestly, there are maybe one more defensive addition away from depending, again, if it's a back three or back four. I think they're one more defensive position
Mm,
away from being completely solid. I don't know if they have any more plans. Derek Martin sort of said that was the end of Wonders Wednesdays, which was when they were announcing players. So that might be it in terms of offseason signings. We don't know. It's a long time till the start of the season.
mm,
Um, But personally, I would say they probably need one more player to come in. They have, I think, 4 center backs right now. I think they have 3 wing backs, maybe bringing one other wing back just to cover in case there's some injuries. One for each
Also, I
side would
mean,
probably be smart.
Josh Healy's mentioned a few times in this off season that Zachary Fernandez will start the season at HFX, but he might not finish it all.
Mm.
So maybe they need to start thinking about long-term replacements as well, because these guys had a lot of these players had a really good seasons last year. So just because they haven't got their move this transfer window doesn't mean they won't in the summer.
Very true. Very true. There is still that secondary transfer window that
Yeah.
might throw a wrench in the plans of a lot of the good teams, including Halifax Wanderers. So we'll see how they adjust to that as the season goes on. But for now, they're looking quite strong. But moving on to the next little bit of transfer news, this time happening on the way west coast at
Going coast to coast.
Pacific FC. We're literally going coast to coast already. Um, is Pacific FC one player out, one player in. Again, a surprise departure and a long incoming in Dario Sanata and Bradley Vliet. So Bradley Vliet has left Pacific, and finally the official announcement of Dario Sanata to Pacific FC was in this past week. I know you have some things to talk about with Dario Sanata and where he's coming from, but maybe we should start first with who is leaving in
Yeah.
Bradley Vliet. Were you a little bit surprised with him leaving, given that he was actually not like a pretty decent performer for Pacific last season, or were you thinking that this was sort of long in coming as well?
I was kind of seeing it because attacking wise on the left side of defense, he was possibly the better option for Pacific, but Mukambilwa was so much better defensively, and he beat him out for this job. And I don't think he particularly wants to be a left back, but when you've got Kunle Dadaluke on the other side, he's just thinking, okay, well, I'll adapt my game. I'll be a left back, and he outplayed Bradley Vliet. And I just think he had his opportunity to try and win a space back, and I don't think he did. And it was either we'll keep you here as a backup for the rest of the year, or you can go and find something to like another option. And I think that's probably what they both, the player and club, came to an agreement on.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll probably be seeing Bradley Vliet find another team, I'm
Yeah.
guessing relatively soon, given the timing of the departure. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we get an announcement within the next few days. But yeah, I mean, I was looking at one account that I've been a big fan of recently, CPL by the Numbers
Mm.
on Twitter X. Had a little
Twitter.
diagram. Yeah, I'm just gonna call it Twitter. I don't want to call it X. On Twitter had a nice little visual of data about Bradley Vliet, and then he was actually quite a good performer. I think his only weakness was his passing, so I was a little surprised seeing him leave. I'm assuming that it's because maybe he's wanting to move somewhere else or find opportunities elsewhere, because I think he would have been someone that would have, at least like you mentioned, be a good deputy for Mukambilwa.
Mm.
But I guess maybe they have to free up some space to be able to finally official
Yeah.
sign Dario Sanata, the Victoria, BC native, coming back home to the islands. Were you surprised at this signing when it was first reported a few weeks ago? Is this a player that you are excited about, especially coming from the Scottish Third Division?
Yeah, so Scottish
Um,
League One, so below the Scottish Premiership, got Scottish Championship, Scottish League One. So it's a long way down. I'll target. I've got a couple of points on this. I'm going to target the
the
Scottish
floor is
accent,
yours.
if that's okay. I implore anyone listening to go and find out anything you can about Derek Adams. He was the manager of Ross County, of Victor Lattori, is currently one of their defenders, one of their midfielders. Derek Adams left a League Two side and You'll have to forgive me. I've completely forgotten who that was.
A Scottish League Two side or an
No,
English
a
League Two?
English League Two side. So um, Morecambe. There we go. Morecambe. Not the biggest name. I'll accept that maybe the majority of our Canadian listeners don't know much about Morecambe.
They have a shrimp on their logo, don't they?
Is that right? You know probably more than me about Morecambe. But either way, he went to Ross County. He arrived, and quite shortly after, told media after a game that the football he had just watched was some of the worst he'd ever seen, and his players in League Two in England were a million miles better than the Scottish Premier League players that he was currently coaching. You'll probably understand that he didn't last long in this job for those comments, but I think that's something that needs to be taken into account for anyone, especially Pacific fans, who are curious to maybe who will go and look at some of the highlights of how Dario Zanatta has done in the Scottish League One or third tier, who has had, which is 2 levels below the slightly crazy comments of a possibly unhinged man in charge of Ross County. But the quality isn't great. It really isn't great. So as much as so he's had some good moments that you can watch on highlights, you've got to take into account that the level is the level he's been playing at for a while now has not been good. Nevertheless, I don't mean that as a complete knock on him, because players are coming from all over the world, and they when you get you in the right space, he could be fantastic, and he could be really good in CPL. He's definitely got ability on the ball, and maybe under the sort of the stewardship of a good coach and a good team, maybe he could be a really great player. My question on the transfer, like the decision to bring him in, which I'll throw to you, is when I've watched, he is a right-footed, left-sided forward, and I'm pretty sure Pacific have got one of those nailed on. So I'm really unsure how they're going to fit him in, or if they're going to move Ayman Salouf. Like, what do you feel?
Yeah, that's actually a fantastic point because Amon Salouf is a very young player. I think he's 22 now, who has bags of quality that we saw, especially in the first half of last season. And I don't think you can necessarily usurp him quite easily. Admittedly, he wasn't starting really in the second half of the season.
Yeah,
Maybe that's because of fitness issues that hopefully he has already overcome, and he's fit as a fiddle for the beginning of the season because he's a player I love to watch.
yeah,
But yeah, for Dario Zanata, I don't know if James Merriman is going to ask him to play in a sort of different position. Maybe he's going to bring him more inside because, again, Pacific don't really have a striker right now.
no,
And he's
yeah,
the only attacking player that they've brought in ahead of the new season. So maybe James Merriman is thinking of playing him as a sort of maybe wide striker role coming in off the left, pairing alongside Salouf. I'm not quite sure because, he played. I think Zanata played something over 200 appearances in Scotland for a bunch of different teams. He started at Hearts, then had a bunch of loan moves to like Queen's Park, Wraith
yeah.
Rovers.
You're
Um,
I mean, you look at that Wikipedia page, like, because I'm on the same one as I'm looking through that, and tell like anyone who hasn't loaded it up now, tell me how many goals he has scored in his last 4 years from Ayr United, Wraith Rovers, and he's played 92 games. How many goals has he scored? 9.
yeah.
So, let's not get carried away that this is a player who's got bags of goals in him in lower levels. Yeah, he may have played. We are speculating, so I'm just, and he's going from a whole new league. Like the Canadian Premier League is going to be very different, and the Scottish Premier League and the lower leagues below that, especially tactically, I don't think I think the CPL, I think when he goes to Pacific, he's going to have a lot more opportunities to work on his game tactically. I think from speaking with James Merriman a number of times, the way he thinks about the game and the way we've seen him set his team up, I think like I could look at that and we can be really critical by looking at a number of these things. And my personal thoughts on Scott
Yeah,
lower
damn, Mike, tell me how you really feel about
I'm
Scottish
being
football.
really harsh, and I apologise. Luckily, I'm safely down here in the south of England. But I think he's going to get the opportunity to really work on his game slightly differently, and I think that Pacific are, if he's going to cut when he comes over here, I think he's going to get the chance to work on his game in a very different way. And I think the
Mm.
way that football is played here, I mean, and Scottish football is probably the same sort of roughly the same sort of climate as most of the Canadian games, all played on grass. He's going to be playing on flat on like Astro and things like that. So he's gonna have a different. It's going to be a whole new setting for him. So I think this could be. I do think it's going to be really great for him, and I think he could turn out to be like he could turn out to really surprise a lot of people.
Yeah.
But he's got a
And
lot to.
and to be fair to him, it's not like he's never played in these
Mm.
environments necessarily before, because he comes from the Vancouver Whitecaps Academy.
Yeah.
He comes from playing, in Victoria and playing in the mainland. So he's used to a little bit of how the environment is in BC soccer, though admittedly has changed a lot
Mm.
since he's left. But yeah, I think either way, because of what he's been used to since leaving for Scotland quite a few years back. I forget exactly what year he left. I think it was 2015. Yeah, it was 2015 when he moved to Hearts initially. So nearly a decade ago
Yeah.
since he left. So things have definitely changed.
I mean, yeah,
And
he's only 26, so it's not like he
and
was
he's
a
on.
pro player here. This was, yeah, he's going as a teenager. So
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, definitely it's going to be different to what he expects. But yeah, I'm just curious to see where he plays, what happens with him and Amon Saloof, and with the big gap that they have at number 9, is he the answer? Like you mentioned, his goal scoring
they
record
got
isn't
a 10
fantastic.
as well. Like they haven't got an attacking midfielder. Like maybe he'll come more central. I don't know. Like he did. Like if you, I think they might be trialing him in that. Like it could be that he comes more central, and you've got a more fluid attack then, because we said it like a number of times last year. Like Pacific had a decent team, but when you get them into the final third, they didn't have a player. If Aparicio wasn't getting into those areas, they haven't got a player that can just unlock something with a pass in the center of the pitch. Maybe he could be that guy. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're thinking of him.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, honestly, time will tell, and
Mm.
we'll see
We're the
how things
curious
shape up
ones.
once
Yeah.
the season starts. But yeah, exactly. We're very, very curious to see where he fits in the vision for James Merriman at Pacific. But now we're going to move on to a little bit ways away to Vancouver FC and their new signing. They've been signing a lot of players, and surprise, surprise, it's another local player in Elaj Ba, though he is not actually from BC. I believe he's from Ottawa, but he was playing for the Vancouver Whitecaps 2 side. So it's a player that a lot of BC people will be familiar with. This one is quite a surprising one as well for myself, because I saw Elijah Baz being a player that was, he was starting most games for WFC2. I wonder if it was a similar thing to Vasco Fry, where
Yeah. That's
maybe
something.
he was playing a lot, but he didn't see himself breaking into the start, the proper senior team of the Whitecaps, so he was looking elsewhere. But he's a very, very good right back. I've seen him play a couple times live. Watching WFC2, he has loads of energy, loves bombing up and down that right side, has a good cross on him, and he is pretty decent in the tackle as well.
Mm.
Biggest thing for me with Vancouver FC is I already thought that they sort of had the right back position sort of set. I wonder now this sort of pushes some other players around, where I was seeing, Caden Chung obviously as a
And the
starting right
middle.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe is he playing center mid now, or Perez G as well can play on that as a backup right back. I was thinking that was who was going to be the deputy. James
Yeah,
Cameron can play either side. But it seems now that maybe Afshin Gopi sees Paris G as a center back, James
possibly.
Cameron as the left back, and so they needed the backup right back, and that's where you got Elijah Ba. I think for me that sort of clarified probably how things are. Then again, with Afshin Guppy, you never know. He loves to move things around and keep you guessing, keep you on
Yeah.
your toes in his squad selection. So maybe in a couple weeks when training opens up for media to go and see, I'll be able to give a little get a little bit more insight and give a little bit more information on what might be happening between all of these players. But solid player for Vancouver FC, a player that knows what it's like to play in BC. And I think good competition for Caden Chung, because obviously Caden Chung probably, when Vancouver FC was just starting and he was first signed, arguably the best player on the team, just compared to, not including some international players that we weren't really sure of, at least for the local players, probably the best player on the team.
Mm.
Now is a little bit more competition above him. The floor has sort of been raised at Vancouver FC with a lot of the signings, even the depth signings. So it's not gonna be as easy coming for Caden Chung
Yeah.
um, to just be a locked in starter at that right back position. But yeah, now with, I think, I still don't think Vancouver FC are done. Last I chatted with um, uh, Afshin Gopi at a press conference, he said that they had a few more signings that they were waiting to sort of confirm. So it's not just going to finish with Elijah Ba. I think there might be one or two more that we're going to be hearing from, which is super exciting, because it might be a completely like new side that we see take the field at their opening match. So it'll be interesting to see what happens between now and then. But for you, Vancouver FC, are they maybe a dark horse in the league entering 2024 because of all these signings that they made, especially a lot of high profile signings over the last few months?
Yeah, definitely. I think Elijah Bar adds that sort of dynamic side that James Cameron provides on the other wing, and they can use their attacking midfield and their midfield in sort of clever ways from central areas and finding space around. Because sometimes Caden Chung was fantastic, but he's not a bomb it forward kind of guy, up and down vertical runner. He's better with the ball. So this gives them these different options now, and I think we're seeing as they bring in these new players, we're seeing Vancouver like having different options of how they can attack different games, and they can look at they can look at their opponents and come up with different ideas, and I think that's really exciting. I think they've definitely got a lot of backups. Obviously, like you mentioned there, Paris G could come in the middle. They've already got Anthony White, who had an impressive sort of start to the year. Rocco Romeo was very good. David Norman Jr. has come in. I mean, they've got plenty of different options now. It's going to be they're really, really interesting, because a lot of this, obviously, like every team, depends on how everyone gels. But if it gels, it's half as well as it could, like half as well as we're thinking it might be. That could be a really, really dangerous team.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And now that Ashton has a full proper preseason now with a more full and experienced squad, yeah, we might be seeing a new way of playing for Vancouver FC because of all the new personnel that they have. And I personally am super excited to be able to report on that as preseason goes along. So stay tuned on for my own personal Twitter, and as we chat about it on Coast to Coast here, what's going on in Vancouver. But exciting times for the Langley side. But moving on to the next slide, in for the last team, we're going to be talking about Atletico Ottawa making another pretty decent addition in signing Kevin Dos Santos from York United. Now, I found this really funny because it almost feels like something that I would do in a FIFA career mode kind of game mode or a football manager where a team beats me at the most crucial, time of the season, and it's one player that scores the last minute goal to send me down or knock me out of a cup, and I get super frustrated and I become petty, and then I say, you know what? Next time I have the opportunity, I'm going to sign that player. So you can't do that to me anymore. That's almost how it felt for
Yeah.
me for Atletico Ottawa. Be like, Kevin Dos Santos, you ruined our season last year. So as a way to say to have revenge against Ottawa, we're snatching against York. We're snatching you from York and bringing you to Ottawa. And they had a really funny video where Kevin Dos Santos sort of was watching the goal he scored that essentially sunk Ottawa's postseason hopes. And he just kind of looked at the camera and went, sorry. And yeah, reminded me of I don't know if you saw Matt Doherty when he signed for Spurs
Oh,
from
yeah.
Wolves. He grew up an Arsenal fan. Had a bunch of like Arsenal tweets that he deleted on video and kind of went sorry. So I found that pretty funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kevin Dos Santos coming into Ottawa, not necessarily a player that we believe is going to be a starting player, because already they have a lot of talent. I mean, Balou Tabla, it's going to be hard to be able to usurp him in that starting 11 position. But a really good depth piece, a really good player off the bench, and he's already shown against his new club that he can be a very much impact player. What was your reaction to the signing, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a nice little, like you say, a little depth option that gives them the chance. We've said plenty of times they don't really have a plan B very often last year, and I think this gives them a chance to shake things up. If they need to change the game, they can change formation, give different types of attacks, coming off the bench more than anything. But yeah, do some really useful addition to the roster.
Yeah, I think that's again, Ottawa have been creating a really, really good squad. Not only a good squad in terms of starting 11, but a really good squad in depth, and having a player like Kevin Dos Santos and that kind of player to be able to have as an option off the bench is why a lot of people are pipping Ottawa to be strong favorites,
Mm.
early season strong favorites to potentially, go and win the regular season or maybe even the playoffs. It would be reminiscent of 2021, and it'd be nice to see some other teams outside of Cavalry and Forge, and I guess you could say Pacific, really compete for the league once again as it did 2 years ago. So it'd be great to see maybe a little bit of a power shift in the scales of CPL to have some other teams like Ottawa or Halifax or even Vancouver FC to be able to compete for the title there. But that is it for us. Thank you so much once again for tuning into this episode. As a reminder, once again, let us make sure they follow us on our socials at Coast to Coast FC, so you can let us know what your thoughts are on each of these week's episodes. Did you like the new format for the Canadian Championship? How did you find the Cavalry game, and what do you think of these transfers? Let us know if you can, and if it's a good little comment, we'll give you a shout out on the next show. But until next time, I'm Felipe Ojejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.